Welcome to Founders Field Notes, the podcast where you can learn from founders how to be a founder. I'm Jason Klug, CEO and founder of Klugonics Group and serial entrepreneur. This week we have a fellow CEO and founder of a B2B service company, Earl Foote, who runs his company Nexus IT, a IT service and solution business, and he is nationwide. A big inspiration to me, building such a massive B2B service out of Utah, and also fellow podcast host with his podcast, Tech Beat, which I hope one day I could be on. On that podcast, he also likes to share fellow stories from other founders to inspire other entrepreneurs to build their dreams. So listen in this week on Earl Foote teaching us entrepreneurs how to always be leveling up. Because the interesting thing, you've been an entrepreneur for 23 years.
That's correct.
Right.
Yes.
So yeah. I wanted to start from the fact that, when you're an entrepreneur for that long, people only know you as the Nexus IT guy, for example, right? Or your entrepreneurial journey. It's always interesting to look beyond that, like when you were an employee. Yeah. So I'd be curious to know what you were doing 25 years ago as Earl.
Good question. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, dude.
What a privilege. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
As you know, I have a podcast. I have a bit of a content game myself.
It's been you're part of the inspiration of me starting a podcast. Is I saw what it did for you.
Awesome.
Remember we talked about that over whiskey?
Did. Yes,
you
we did over whiskey. Yes, we did.
So it was
Scotch, actually. Yeah.
But it's like you've taken the Utah. Everybody in Utah in the business world knows you because of what you've done on LinkedIn and all the other platforms.
Yeah.
So,
I really dig what you're up to here, Jason. This founder field note idea, right? Founders field note idea. Really, it's kind of what my content game is, centered around. My podcast is centered around, for the past 6 or 8 years. As you said, I've been, 23 years, a little over 23 years now, as an entrepreneur. Started my business at 23 years old.
Me too, dude.
Yeah.
23 years old.
Yeah. But you're way younger than me.
Well, I'm 10 years in, but still 23 years. That's like a sweet spot to start a business, I feel like.
Yeah, it's definitely, you're very flexible. Growth-minded, and, you don't have a lot of, you're not super risk averse, at that point in life. I think you haven't learned or programmed yourself too much. I've kind of been on this journey, and if we go back and talk about kind of the whole journey of how we started, and then how I got to where I'm at now. Suffice it to say that just over 10 years ago, my brother and I, so we were co-founders in the business. My brother and I split up the business half and went our separate ways 10 years ago, and I became sole owner, operator, founder of Nexus IT at that point. To that point, I'd really, and we've always bootstrapped the business, and I had really worked more in the business than on the business. And when I hit that inflection point of, okay, I am now a solopreneur. And I've got, a few hired people around me. At that point, when we split, maybe only 3 or 4 employees, rebuilding basically from the ground up. And what you maybe don't even know is that a big part of my journey has been e-commerce as well. So we actually started, the very first, thing that we did was to set up a turnkey network gear e-commerce website in 1998 with an organization called Net Sales. It was really progressive because they had API integration with Ingram Micro and Tech Data. Wow. So you had, for $500, you had millions of SKUs, right? And a website, a turnkey website, or e-commerce website up and rolling with shopping cart and checkout and the whole deal, right? What I didn't know is how to drive traffic to the thing, right? So we turned it on and thought, well, we're going to be Bill Gates in a couple months, right? And then be billionaires. And, a few months later, you're like, where's the traffic? Where are the sales, right?
Yeah.
But a big part of my journey was, different lines of e-commerce. Mostly related to technology, but also soccer. I've been a big soccer buff most of my life.
Wow.
So I did have some soccer brands, and an online soccer shop, as well as some physical soccer shops.
It's almost like a Shopify play.
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah, way earlier than Shopify. Right. Anyways, when my brother and I separated the business, I did away with most of our lines of e-commerce at that time because they weren't profitable, and decided to focus in strictly on the business to business, IT consulting and cybersecurity services, which really were kind of the core of what we do and where we had found significant traction. So going all the way back, what I'm telling you is that, and I haven't even answered your question yet. Now that I think about it. What I'm telling you, though, is that it took me a couple of years, to train up some leaders and get to a point where I could really work a lot more on the business than in the business.
Oh, yeah.
And so the last, 6 or 8 years, a big part of my journey has been engaging in the community. And engaging in the community has led a lot of people to ask me a lot of questions, right? And look for connections to resources and answers. So that's where, I started to become inspired to start up my content game and really kind of ramp. And actually, it dovetails really nice into who we are and what we do as a business. That's kind of where I got started on this whole journey of producing content that is aimed at helping other founders and leaders progress and grow, right? And so all that said, I'm privileged to be here, taking part in you having a very similar angle of sharing the stories of, yourself and then other founders. Going back 25 years ago, I was...
well, on that though, that's exactly... the same, I mean, you're talking about, you've pivoted a bunch of times. I'm sure you've had hardships and mistakes and stuff. You've gone through tough pivot, decisions of the business, with your brother and stuff. That stuff's brutal, right? And, I've gone through something similar, in a way, right? Yeah. Recently. And it's that's what the whole point of it is it's I saw this graph on LinkedIn, speaking of content. It's one of those random images that someone posts. It's an educational visual of, you have the bar that is your book smarts, and then you have the bar with the book smarts and then the experience on top of it. And then you have the book smarts, the experience, and then the mistakes that you learn from. Right. And I feel as an entrepreneur, the thing, especially when it was really early stages of it, I made mistakes myself, and I just realized how quickly I learned. And meeting with clients and discussing with clients, I'd always talk about the things that I messed up on and whatnot in the past. And so they don't make the same mistake. And then I always learned by talking to various founders, by asking them not about how things are doing and stuff, but more about what hardships have you gone through? Or what pivots did you make and stuff like that. And I always feel you get so much more value out of that when building your business.
A ton.
So yeah. And it's just fun to talk about.
Yeah, no, massive amounts. This morning, actually, interesting enough, I was reading an article on Entrepreneur.com, basically, and this is a short article, but talking about how success does not favor the brilliant. It favors the bold, right? Absolutely, to be successful, you have to learn to level up on the knowledge side. And, like yourself, I didn't really come from, a hyper-connected sort of privileged background, right? I grew up actually not far from here, on the west side of Salt Lake. Son of at that time an electrician. Ultimately he worked his way to vice president of operations or COO of Wasatch Electric. My dad did. Wow. Knowledge only gets you so far, right? Giving up an aversion, to risk and being comfortable with being with discomfort, right? Being comfortable with stretching yourself all the time, right? And being bold and going after what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to build as a business. Honestly, I think those are some of the best potential traits that a successful entrepreneur can have. And it takes time to, if that's not inherent to you, because there are people that's inherent to, right? Yeah. To me, it wasn't. I've always been naturally introverted, and I grew up in a very risk averse family. Not to criticize in any way. My parents grew up very much in situations of lack, and so that sort of mentality and that programming, of course, passes down and passes through, and that's like, as I've taken a deeper look at life and success, and you look at kind of this habitual cycle of people or areas that have a hard time kind of breaking out of the shell, right, and really leveling up and going above and beyond. Really it comes down to the programming that we receive. Part of that through DNA, part of it through upbringing, and the different organizations and people that we're in contact with. As an entrepreneur, I think one of the biggest kind of ahas that I've ever had is that, if you're going to create something significant and you're going to try to create success in that, you yourself have to level up, right? And what I mean by that is you have to realize and understand. I shouldn't say you have to. In my journey, I've found that a keen sense of self-awareness has been really, really key.
Yeah.
Really stripping myself back to the bone, doing some deep work and understanding who I am, what motivates me, why I react and act, why I may think a certain way, and then dig deep into the beliefs that I have, why I have those, where they came from, what beliefs are holding me back, and then doing deep work to get beyond those, right?
Yeah.
And so
I do that with therapy. I've learned, especially in the last year, I've been doing that, and it changes how I react in situations, how, when I am getting outside of my window of tolerance, I know I'm outside of it. And then, okay, maybe we should table this discussion, stuff like that. And it's been super valuable. But in 1 year of doing it, I realized that it's a never ending game where you're always finding something new because a different type of scenario happens. And it's like, the way I reacted there was not how I wanted to.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about this in my next session. And then you talk about it and you find out a new tool to use or a new, way of thinking or processing something. And it's almost been, I look forward to it every time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, therapy, and whatever form you receive that in, right? I've done therapy. I've done plenty of coaching and mentorship, and I have a good network of advisors and friends, guys like you that, we can go grab a bite and a drink,
it's fun.
and just spitball ideas. And hey, man, I'm stuck with this. Do you have any ideas? Have you seen this? What have you done? Kind of stuff. But this concept of consistently working on yourself. One of the biggest revelations I've had as an entrepreneur is that you are the bottleneck, right? And particularly when I was a solopreneur, because I think I did a merger acquisition in August of 22. It's weird to say 22 now because now we're just a few days into 23, right?
Yeah.
But August of 22, I did a merger acquisition, and those two owners, Eric and Jake, joined me, as co-founders now, as partners, CRO and COO positions in the company, which has been, fantastic. But for a decade, I was a solopreneur, and when you're in that sort of scenario, like you 100% are the bottleneck. If your company can't grow and achieve, it is because of you, and it's and that's having this idea of total ownership and responsibility for outcomes, right? That's another big epiphany I've had in my life. Nobody else or nothing else is responsible for what happens, the experience that I have or the outcomes that I create. It's 100% on me.
Yeah.
And then applying that into a business of, well, if my business is not able to get beyond X level, right? If we've hit a ceiling, what do I need to do as founder, as CEO, to change myself, to change my limiting beliefs, What new knowledge do I need? What new skills and knowledge does my team need? Right. And then just this constant battle for leveling up, this constant battle for being bold and going, okay, well, change is hard. As humans, we are averse to that. That's a fight or flight mechanism to shy away. And so when you get uncomfortable, you get in fact, for me, I mean, it's, I've had to battle some anxiety in that process, right? Have to figure out that's where mindfulness and consciousness and meditation has been really good for me.
It comes in and you don't realize wow, I'm really anxious right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have to recollect, you're sitting there at night and your heart rate starts going up and you're like, wow, this is really affecting me more than I thought.
And you can't sleep. And why is this happening to me?
It happens. It's part of it.
As a founder, you spend the majority of your time stretching outside your comfort zone. If I were to guess it, maybe 90% of your time, right? And if you're not spending the majority of your time stretching who you are and stretching your organization, then you're not leveling up. You're not going to grow.
You just flatline. Maybe you're comfortable and you have the income or the needs that you're looking for, and your team is happy with. It's sometimes that is okay. Maybe someone wants to get to that level and just hold that, until retirement, or whatever. But yeah, I guess it's just different types of entrepreneurs. Some people I always want more.
Yeah, I would challenge that slightly, and that's just what I mean by that is. My belief is that a stagnant business is a dying business. Right?
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah. I feel that way.
There are those industries, that I think are more forgiving, and you can hit a plateau and kind of ride it for some period of time. But in most industries, especially in a modern world, the market and consumers or your clients, they need you to level up all the time, right?
Yeah.
And the pace of it is when I got started 23 years ago, you could level up every 5 years. Yeah. Now it's every 6 months. You got to be leveling up at least, with some sort of new capability, new service, new offering, new. And so, innovation obviously drives the marketplace today. And I think that, businesses and founders who are not looking to constantly innovate, which means innovating themselves as well. Honestly, I think, when you stagnate, that curve begins to turn down, right? And so for me, that's partially why I'm always hustling, always fighting, because I feel as long as we're somewhat up and to the right? Nobody's journey is this, right? Nobody's journey.
Or if it is, there's something's going to happen, or it's
all of us are on a roller coaster, but if that roller coaster is, gradually heading up and to the right, that's where I feel like I'm comfortable, because there's progress, and I know that we're thriving as a business, even though we deal with challenges, day in and day out. Which it's another thing I think all budding founders need to understand is that business will throw you for a loop. It is challenging.
Yeah. And as soon as you solve one problem, another one's there waiting to jump out of a bush and get you.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable. To that point, that's kind of why the theme of the set is the way it is. Because I think looking back to my childhood, my parents were also pretty,
this is cool,
conservative like that too, where they, risk averse and stuff like that, where I was always kind of the little, punk rock skater boy. And I actually, I think back to what made me resilient was skateboarding. Because you got to think, you want to do a trick, you are falling so many times over and over again.
Yeah.
And you have to shake it off and get back up and do it over and over and over again. And then you land it and it's oh, that's satisfaction. Yeah. What's next? And I felt and I always look back to what I learned or what I went through skateboarding to why I could do this every day, and deal with these challenges. And, punk rock, because you got to be a little punk rock to be a founder.
A little bit anarchist.
You gotta
you got to be against the establishment a little bit.
So I'll keep building on this a bit. But that's kind of where that all comes from.
Dude, it took me so long to figure out how to ollie. But
you gotta keep
going, right?
Yeah.
I got to read you this thought I saw on social media yesterday that I think is just so relevant to what we're talking about here. Your first workout will be bad. Your first podcast will be bad. Your first speech will be bad. Your first video will be bad. Your first anything will be bad. But you can make your 100th, but you can't make your 100th without making your first. So put your ego aside and start. Don't let fear hold you hostage from the things you want to try and the future that awaits you, right?
Yeah, that's great.
It's so true. Like,
yeah.
And that you just, as an entrepreneur, and I'm not saying that it's easy, it's been a struggle and a journey for me to get to that point again with, the programming I have from my past, to get to that point of I'm always willing or trying to always be willing to set fear aside, set, my risk aversion aside and say, okay, I'm going to try something new because we need to figure out how to get to the next level. Or I need to figure out how to get to the next level as an individual, as a person, right? So, that I saw yesterday and I was kind of like, this is pretty, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the good thing about LinkedIn is you get those little nuggets of good stuff every so often, and sometimes there's just BS on there. But yeah, so we go back. I'm just curious where you were at before then, because similar time frame. I feel like when I was, age 20, I worked for Scott Paul before I started my company.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. But it was interesting because similar time frame where I got a couple years of professional experience in an environment where I was exposed to, an entrepreneur and pivots and kind of creating a department within a company. So I got like freedom and stuff. And then that's when I started my company. So it's, just curious and then I remember the day I walked out of my final day going, okay, tomorrow I start. And then sitting down that next morning and being like, okay, here I go. You know what I mean? So it's always interesting to hear back to what that was like for you. Like, what were you doing? And then what was that day one like?
Yeah. Before I answer that, just, congrats on what you built.
Thank you.
Yeah. What a great, I got the tour.
Bootstrap too, just like you.
Yeah,
it's more fun that way.
Bootstrap or die, right?
Yeah.
What a great organization that you built.
Thank you.
What a great venture you built, and multiple brands and kind of multiple different, ventures under one roof. Cool team. Awesome digs.
Fortunate,
Yeah. So 25 years ago, even if I go back a little bit further, I was always a little artistic growing up. Not a little, I painted, I sketched, I did play music. My parents started me on piano at 6. At 12, I convinced them to let me go to drums.
Cool.
Which they were not very happy with.
My parents never let me do that. I was a guitar player for that reason.
Yeah, I didn't switch to guitar until college. So in college, I self-taught, myself guitar and bass. And actually, that first year, we started a band, and I would play bass in that band. And I've pretty much played bass, since, and in bands, played bass. That's kind of my groove.
Bass is fun.
Yeah, dude, it's my jam for sure. I mean, I can still play, rhythm on a 6 string or whatever. I can noodle a little bit of solos, because the scales are all the same as bass. But most of the last it's been almost 30 years, has been on bass. I thought I would be an artist, in my young teens. And my parents, of course, as risk-averse people, convinced me that, artists don't make any money, that was a bad life decision, right? So I honed in on architecture. I was like, okay, well, I can still draw, I can still be creative, I can have a more stable living, right? That way. So I studied architecture actually in high school. I dual matriculated my junior and senior year. So I did a half day at high school. I did a half day at Salt Lake Community College.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I got, college credits while I was in high school. Thought I would become an architect. In my early 20s, I landed a job with an architecture firm that ended up being a structural engineering firm.
So more boring.
Yes. And I made probably, a poor decision that also led to where I'm at now. And that poor decision was I decided to give up architecture and go into structural engineering, into civil engineering. Because I was working for that firm. So I changed my major in school studied engineering instead of architecture. Worked, actually I put myself through university, through college. I would work full time. I'd go to school full time at night and carry 18 to 21 credit hours a quarter.
Wow, and that's tough.
It was. And on top of that, at 23, I was married. Had a kid, started a business, right?
That's a lot.
Yeah. It was, but I guess I've always been driven, and I didn't know any better. I was stupid. I was young. I was foolish, So I took this pivot into civil engineering during school and a little bit after, so about maybe 4 or 5 years total. I was doing civil engineering work, ultimately kind of decided, okay, this is a little bit mundane and boring. I'm, sitting behind a desk, crunching numbers all day long. And now, funny enough, part of my journey is, and where I started to really connect with technology and where I'm at now. I was a hobbyist already, I was building gaming systems, building PCs and that kind of stuff, kind of late teens, early 20s. Literally, I started helping my employers go off the drawing board, the irony of this, right? Going off the drawing board to computer-aided drafting systems. I was setting up client server environments and, getting them set up on AutoCAD and StruCAD and different things, and and training their staff on going from the drawing board, which I had gone into architecture so I could be on the drawing board, and then suddenly I'm behind a computer and crunching numbers and producing drawings on a computer all day long, and that's where I kind of became disenamored with with that career decision. And at the time, the opportunity to lean into technology presented itself. My brother had graduated from Westminster with an IT systems admin degree, and we had this harebrained idea of this e-commerce website, and then immediately started having a few organizations ask us to become their contract system
quite the pivot
administrators. Yes. And actually our client number one was the Better Business Bureau of Utah.
Okay. I remember.
We started. That was kind of our first entrepreneurial epiphany. Was there's a massive need for SMBs in the market right now, for qualified talent that can help them navigate their original digital transformation. Because literally late 90s, there were companies on paper, right? And we were helping those companies go from paper to digital records, client server environments and computing environments and all that kind of stuff. And we saw a need and a niche in the marketplace, and a need we felt like we could fill better than most. And that's where we got started on this journey. The past 23 years have been, as you mentioned, kind of a roller coaster of testing theses and ideas and pivoting. Some e-commerce stuff, some direct to consumer stuff, some business to business stuff, and ultimately. Really, the past, decade, I've focused all of our efforts in on, business to business IT and cybersecurity services, managed service, managed security service kind of models. We still had e-commerce lines up until January 1 of 2018. I completely did away with the last of our e-commerce lines. Took another $1.5 million hit in revenue, and rebuilt back, well beyond that now in the last 4 years. But
that's a tough decision to make. But I mean,
it really is.
Yeah. But if you just knew,
I knew we needed to focus on our core, and again that wasn't very profitable for us, right? The last 4 years have been really exponential growth for us. Again, not being divided in our focus and getting really focused on. How are we going to create the right experiences and outcomes for our clients and our people? And what are the core kind of focuses we're going to have in that process, right? And so my entrepreneurial journey's been interesting. It's been 23 years, but it's been my learning journey. I think has probably been. I feel at times slower than some, right? That first 14 years or so with my brother. We were just mostly an organic growth kind of company. We were both quite introverted, not working really hard to market and sell the business. And candidly, having come from a background where we didn't have access to ideas and network, and we hadn't studied business, we never struggled. We were always growing, and together we built a pretty decent business over 14 years. And of course, we had many challenges along the way, many things we had to deal with. Beginning to lean into knowledge and acumen and growth and understanding of a business and how to operate it and how to make it grow. That's been, a more recent part of my journey in the last 12 to 15 years. Yeah.
But you were grinding internally then.
Yeah.
Those early years. What were you working on? you were coding websites and stuff, or what?
No, so mostly, in those early days, you do anything and everything that it takes, right? But so mostly I was doing network, infrastructure, cloud design, architecture, and then building that out, right, for our clients. Usually, turning that over then to support by our team, right? But I was one of those lead, engineers on the team.
Pretty technical, self-taught then, with an architectural and structural engineering background to figure out.
Yeah. So when I decided to go into the field, I didn't have the education, right? But my brother had just graduated, had all of his books, had taken certification. So I'm like, I'm not going to go back to school. Give me your books.
Yeah.
I'll learn and I'll go take certifications, because at that point I think you could go get an MCSE and a CCNA, A+ and all that stuff. The exams were about $100 a pop. You didn't have to go to school.
That's
you could just go take
affordable.
the exams.
Yeah.
So I would study up. I started with like an A+, Net+, MCSE, and just would study up on the materials on my own time, and then I'd go take the exam, pass the certification.
Wow.
And
that's hard.
Establish that knowledge. But then, of course, a lot of the knowledge I had already, because again, I was a hobbyist that was messing around. I was already building, networks and building systems. And then again, with my employers, I had to figure a lot of that out, because I was the young kid, I was working with 40 and 50-year-olds, and I was the only person who understood technology. So I was the kids setting up the client server networks and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's how, so it was similar because I dropped out of college, but the things that I did mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
And the things that I focused and honed in on during college were like the manufacturing technology classes or the drafting and CAD classes. And those are the things that I just love to do. And when I got the job with Scott, I was really efficient on CAD, and I just focused all of my energy on my CAD skills. And I think I owe it to that. But being an entrepreneur, you do have to, if there's a gap you don't have, you have to be able to dig in and figure it out. And sometimes you feel like I'm a little bit of trial and error, I'm a little bit of working with a professional that can kind of slip me some of the pointers and the information that I pick up on and build from.
Yep.
And I was fortunate where Scott let me basically do that, where I got to CAD stuff up, go to a manufacturer, sit with the engineers at the manufacturing facility, metal fab or plastic injection or whatever, and then basically get free critiques on my work and why it's bad and good and stuff like that. And it was it just accelerated my learning. But it's just the ability to do that and roll your sleeves up and dig in. You have to. And that rolls into things like accounting and figuring out a P&L and how to read it and assess it and figure out what's good and bad and stuff, and balance sheets. And that's all stuff that I didn't know 5 years ago.
Right.
And eventually I was forced to figure it out. Yeah. But
that's what I'm talking about. As a founder, you have so many gaps, right? And it doesn't matter if you've gone to the best school, in the country and got, a prestigious MBA, book knowledge and real world application are completely different.
So different. Right? Yeah.
And so
I was not a good student.
Yeah.
I was so bad at studying.
I wasn't a great student.
Yeah.
I did reasonably well because it was required, right?
Yeah.
I would literally get my ass kicked if I didn't, I'm not criticizing my dad. It was different.
My parents were disappointed in my schooling, but they just, as long as I was walking out, picking the knowledge up that I was interested in, and, then I guess they're not too disappointed now.
Yeah. Yeah. C's were not permitted when I grew up.
Yeah, I got plenty of C's.
Yeah. But that is the founder's journey. Being real with yourself, that you constantly have gaps. I'm 23 and a half years into my journey, really. I still feel like a baby most days. I still feel like there are massive amounts of gaps, and I'm just real with myself about it. I don't understand or know this yet, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to learn it, right?
Yeah. Or you can
that's
find
the key, right?
a resource that will fill it so much better than you.
Yeah.
And then you end up learning from that resource, being a part of the team. That's what, like, especially when you grow and you start having the ability to hire team members and resources and stuff. It's like, okay, this is a gap that I cannot do.
Yep.
Like, let's just find the person that can do it way better than I'll ever be able to, and let them own it. Totally. And it's like, that's how you scale, right?
Smart founders realize they don't need to be the smartest person in the room, right?
Yep. Or do it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly those early days of bootstrapping. You kind of got to learn to do everything.
Yeah.
Because you can't afford to hire anybody. You can't even afford an advisor or a mentor unless they're super gracious, which I've had some of those angels in my journey who have just donated their time and
I've had a few of them
efforts
too.
to me, right?
Yeah.
And always having friends again, peers that you can rely on. But that's network is finding and building the right network has been one of those big epiphanies for me. Because again, I didn't grow up with that built in, right? I'm not criticizing that, but I see different paths, right? And my dad, while he ended up an executive of, at the time, the largest electrical contractor in Utah, he started at 18 years old as an apprentice electrician, and worked his way from that all the way to, COO of that company over a 45-year career.
I mean, that's cool to watch.
Yeah. So, I mean, he learned that skill of understanding and closing your gaps, right? And that's how he was able to continue to level up in his career. He's a fighter. I come from Irish blood. I mean, we're fighters. And those are definitely things that I've learned in my journey of just constantly, being willing to go to battle. And it's hard. There are days where you've been beat up, right?
Oh yeah.
You're demoralized mentally. You're like, can I continue to do this? You're spent.
I feel bad for my wife, when I come home and I've had a day like that, and she has to hear it. But it is, it is part of the, that's what you sign up for. Yeah. So that's, so then 10 years ago, the big pivot of buying your brother out, what was that like? Is it still hard today? Did you guys work through it? What was that about?
Good question. I actually didn't buy him out. So we split down. Okay. We split assets and everything. I wouldn't say it was a hard process. I think we were both, mature,
that's good.
Emotionally intelligent people. And we continue to espouse that, to make sure that we're good as family, right?
That's great.
So, there's been a few awkward, moments and feelings, but I think we're beyond that. So really, over that 14 years together, we were kind of just pulling in two different, directions. We had different visions for what we wanted to create. I've always wanted a very high growth sort of business, and, continually wanting to level up. And my brother wanted a simpler lifestyle kind of business. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right. They're just two different choices. Right. And at times I ask myself, have I made the right choice? Because, 10 or 15 years ago, this business was a lot more simple. Right. And I had a little more balance at times because, it wasn't as all-encompassing as it is today. Really, we just kind of came to the consensus of, hey, look, we're trying to do two different things. You're pulling this way, I'm pulling that way. Why don't we just split everything down the middle? Clients, assets, everything we have, split it. You go your way, I go mine. So he runs an IT shop in Heber now.
Okay.
And so for the past decade, again, I was kind of telling you that almost went back to zero at that in revenue because
to build back up.
Gave up half of the revenue and then did away with a bunch of e-commerce lines and, did that more focused pivot into the business to business IT and cyber services. 10 years ago, and then rebuilding from the ground up again, bootstrapping again from the ground up, starting with a couple of employees. And, today we're 65-ish or so right now. Yeah, man, it's been a journey. There's been plenty of difficulties along the way.
Yeah. And it's like emotional difficulties. It's, running the business difficulties. I mean, all of it, there's so many levels.
Yeah.
And what was when you sat down the day after you realized you're basically autonomous at that point, what was the first thing you did? What did you focus on?
Yeah.
Did you look at everything and get the bird's eye view and dig in, or did you already know exactly this is the first thing I'm going to focus on and dig in?
No, I think I had to come to a pretty abrupt realization of I'm alone in this, and suddenly I don't have somebody there with me to help make decisions and for us to bounce ideas back and forth and try to decide, the direction we're going to go and what we're going to do and how we're going to execute, what strategy we want to take, right? All that kind of stuff. And so I immediately kind of went, okay, well, I have visions of grandeur of what I want to create. There's a massive gap, a massive disparity between where we're at now and where I'm at as a founder and where I want to be, right? So I've got to start to level up. And so I immediately began a very intense journey to obtain knowledge and skill, particularly around being a CEO, around running and operating a business, around marketing and selling a business. And that's, one of my big entrepreneurial epiphanies as well, is that, of course, your first priority has to be making sure that your clients and your people have amazing experience and outcomes, right? In a modern world of business, if you don't focus on that, you're not going to get anywhere. But beyond that, one of those big realizations for me was that we must be a marketing and sales organization first, right? If I want to create a high growth business, then we absolutely have to create the engines that provide that. And so to that point, our marketing and sales had been pretty sporadic, haphazard, not a lot of real tried and true, knowledge applied to it. And so I started going to boot camps. I started going to executive and leadership boot camps and marketing and sales boot camps and boot camps and peer groups for my industry, and I still do all that. And so just this consistent effort to level up on knowledge, capability, and skill and business acumen.
And then were you just sustaining through that with your existing clients that you had, the team that you had, and then use that to focus inward and sustain? So things were still healthy while you're doing that before you really started growing.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's okay to do, right? Like it's okay to not have a growth year. I felt like last year, especially for the manufacturing business, was what I did there with, the buyout and stuff. It was like, I wasn't upset that we only grew 20%. You know what I mean? It was like, it's like, okay, that's okay. Let's just let that, let me focus on the infrastructure and how things are going and, stuff like that. And it's okay if we don't grow this year. Let's get the chassis reworked on and stable. And then next year is our growth year. And, versus if you're like, go, you never get the chance to take that step back, absorb fresh knowledge, get your plan and your thoughts together and then go.
Yeah, I got a couple thoughts around that. One is, I can tell you unequivocally that if the foundational building blocks are not built correctly, you will have to pause, right? You'll have to pause and get intentional about building out a robust foundation in order for you to be able to scale and build on top of that, right? I've had to do that multiple times in the past 10 years, right? And multiple times before that.
And it's like it happens consistently. It's not something you do once and, pivots happen. You have to rebuild that foundation with the new pivots, implement it, all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's not just pivots, it's ceilings too. Like in industries, you hit ceilings and when you're, let's say you were a $5 million business, 5 million, a year in revenue business, and over 2 years you become a $10 million a year business, right? What you need to be at 10 million is totally different than what you need to be at 5 million, right? What the market demands of you and your process and your culture and your systems and all that kind of, it's all different, right? The playbook at 5 million is not the playbook at 10 million. And so, you hit those ceilings, and the stress fractures at times start to leak like sieves, right? You start to go, oh shit, what is going on here? And then you do some root cause analysis. You step back and you go, okay, let's really get deep and intentional about what's happening, what's wrong with the business. You just realize, look, the business has to level up to be where we're at and to be ready to continue to scale and build on top of it. And so it's a very intentional process, and it's not a one-time. In my experience, in 23 years in my industry, and look, I won't pretend that my experience is the same as everybody else's or every industry is the same. Yeah. But these themes are pretty typical among most of us as founders, regardless of what our business is. You have to do this multiple times throughout your journey. And my other thought here is that, most people's view of entrepreneurship from the outside is this sexy venture-backed sort of, churn and burn ventures and burn capital like nobody's business. I hate that mindset. Hyper-growth businesses, right? And that's kind of where people have gotten really kind of drawn into what's attractive about the hustle of a founder, right? And part of what we're going through right now is a market correction because that was not sustainable. And I was, in fact, a podcast I'd recommend, for you and anybody who checks out this podcast is All In. I was listening to several episodes on the way back from California yesterday, and they were specifically talking about this, which I've being very close to capital providers and networks of capital providers over the last 18 or 24 months. I've seen the same journey, and that is that LPs and funds have been beat up so hard on valuations and on what they're paying for multiples of EBITDA or multiples of revenue, and they're not getting the returns that they need or want that are sustainable. And so, we're definitely seeing a massive market correction because too much capital has been pumped frivolously into too many ventures that are not producing the right outcomes. When you've got 100%. A SaaS company that's valuating at 40x rev, right?
And that skews what a direct-to-consumer brand feels about what there should be when it's totally different.
Yeah, totally different lines of business. But that's just it. Those fundamentals of business are now being reapplied across the board. And everybody's going, okay, we got to get back to basic, fundamental, strong unit economics like you have. And it's interesting to see that, the focus, even for investors, has gone from primarily we want hyper-growth businesses that are burning cash, right? We want to pump them full of steroids and make them grow as fast as possible to boost that valuation as soon as possible. So we have a 3 to 5 year investment cycle, and we sell for multiples of investment, right?
Or they go to the next round, which I hate that mentality of, hey, instead of bragging about the success of their company, they're bragging about the round they just did. Like it's not like, I don't care about your Series D. Let's check out your bottom line and your revenue.
We just raised, $250 million Series D. Well, what's your revenue? Oh,
how's your operational excellence?
It's like, it's crazy, right? And so everybody's like, look, we want everybody to get back to the basics of creating, strong cash flowing businesses.
Good profitability. Good operations that are smooth. And
it's unfortunate we're seeing mass layoffs, but it's just, you've got, particularly in the tech sector, but you've got so many businesses that are hyper bloated, right? That have inflated teams and fiefdoms around, around managers, unnecessary weight, and the reality is those businesses are a lot more resilient and can run significantly more streamlined with less people,
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But
right?
when you have the dinner plate that is that big, you know, it makes then of course they're going to hire like that. You know what I mean? Like it's and Durai is the only company that I've raised money for, but I raised a family and friends round in 2019 for $120K.
Yeah.
And that was just enough to get like, you know, some tooling, get a new product to market to expand it, and then give us just a little bit of cash to where we can hire a customer service resource without straining ourselves and build a runway. And, you know, now that the business has grown and profitable and stuff like that, and we don't necessarily need to raise money.
Yeah.
But it's like the mentality that I had when I raised $120K, where that could be spent in a day.
Yeah.
You know, if I go and raise $2 million, I'm gonna have the same mentality that I did when I raised that 120.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the mindset. If more businesses had in venture or fundraising and stuff like that, not only would they just have a much healthier, stronger, and well-built business that's more viable and acquirable,
totally.
but they, you know, we would just have better companies all around, you know, versus like anybody can go sell themselves into raising $10 million and building a brand with it, you know, but are they buying all their customers at a loss? Are they, you know, like, how are their margins? You know, it frustrates me.
And I'm not criticizing again, you know, it's just that,
it is what it is.
Kind of been, you know, and venture has created that themselves. Right.
And there are some founders that have raised venture capital and used it properly and have built some banger businesses that are healthy, sustainable, and so on, you know, but, and then there's also some that are just not.
Yeah.
Going from, because I'm with you, like, and that's just because I think both of us are like, we bootstrap pretty hard and have been through, like, we were required to build healthy businesses to sustain, you know, versus if we had big investment, it would change. Like, the survival skills are different, right? In that scenario. So I think I could see why both of us have that mentality, which is fair, but you know,
which I have to commend you, because I look around at what you've built, you know, in the time period you've built, and, you know, having bootstrapped, but you still have, you know, some really great, you know, expensive production and prototyping machines, and a great warehouse, you know, some really nice 3D printing machines. And
when you hit like profitability, you got to spend that money before the end of the year. You know, might as well buy an asset that can, you know, make money later.
Totally. So, and then being mindful of, you know, if you take an investment, whether that's debt or you crowdsource something, or friends and family, or you go after, you know, angel venture, whatever it might be, right? Being mindful of still, you know, building a robust business that has strong fundamentals, like, I think that's all, you know, super, super important. And actually, I think it's going to be a much more significant requirement in the future. Investors have gotten so beat up over the last, you know, 12 or 15 years. And I don't think the market's going to correct itself over a few years here. And I don't think they're going to let it go back to, you know, irresponsible administration of money. Right. So you got to continue to have a grassroots mentality and think about, how do I do more with less? How do I get really creative about getting exposure, you know, getting my brand out there, getting recognition, and doing it in really creative ways that don't cost a lot of money, right? And how do I build great teams that have a culture of, you know, one of our core values, for example, is outwit and outgrit, right? Great teams that have good work ethic, that are willing and want to build something, you know, extraordinary, and are willing to outmuscle, you know, the competition. Look, strong businesses require strong work ethic. It's just a reality, right? And granted, okay, maybe it's partially my Protestant mind and kind of, you know, upbringing of, you know, that. You reap what you sow, you know, kind of thing, right? But but no, that's just I think that's a true fundamental of business. In most scenarios, you can't work 2 hours a day and create a really thriving business, right? Granted, okay, there's always the exceptions to the rule. There's always somebody who's going to pop out of the woodwork and say, "Well, I became a billionaire working 2 hours a day." Cool, good for you. Glad you figured out a model. For most of us, and as you mentioned, you know, there's industries where capital isn't prolific, right? Services,
B2B, yep.
Direct to consumer type of stuff. They're not generally sexy plays that get investors involved because there's not high rates of return on those liquidity events. And banks are very stringent about the capital, the debt that they'll give you to grow. You have to have strong fundamentals in the business to land debt, right?
Yeah, you got to have a healthy P&L.
You do. And so I think we're going to see this correction happen in the market where businesses have to get back to those strong basics, and those that don't or refuse to they're unfortunately probably going to wither and die. And their backers are going to pull funding and all that kind of stuff.
And they're going to have a hard time finding new funding because investors are being way more cautious right now.
Yeah, I've had multiple conversations in the last couple of months with a few friends that have always been venture backed, and we've had these, kind of haven't come to Jesus meeting, type of talks with them. You gotta get real about I know that heroin addiction every 18 months. Have I raised a Series A, a Series B? I know that's addictive, right?
Basically having a burn rate and an end cycle, and if you don't raise before that, What's next? You've had a big year. Like you said, when we were talking over Scotch, we were talking about how you're acquiring, starting to acquire companies.
Yeah.
And that's another way of growth for your type of business.
Yeah.
So what has that been like? Because now you're on the other side of at least one of those acquisitions.
We've done 7 total.
So 7 is ridiculous. Yeah. That's a lot, right? What have you learned from the first acquisition till now?
Yeah.
I'm sure
lots and lots
what
of
are the big takeaways of that? Because that's interesting for something that not everybody's able to even talk about.
Yeah,
that experience.
So we've executed 7 acquisitions to date. Acquisitions or mergers. Some of those, most of them have been very creative deals. A little bit of cash up front, and then some profit sharing or maybe a partial share swap, stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you want to bring those people into the entity with you. Some of them have just been acquiring a book of business, without any employees or any of the other founders or anything like that. So again, that has enabled us to grow more along, consistent basis of about 100% per year, year over year.
Wow.
I'm starting to expand that. And we've done that all here in Utah to this point, starting to expand that, now regionally and nationally, and looking at expanding our footprint.
And tapping into a new market with less risk, basically, which makes total sense.
Yes. And again, knowing that, and we've proven it now over 7 of these, knowing that we can generally in year 1, we can amplify that book of business 80 to 100, 120% in year 1.
Wow.
And then we can consistently grow it again at 30 to 35% per year. And as we, expand the footprint into other markets, which we're already in other markets, but we don't have significant physical presence in those markets, right? Maybe have 1 or 2 employees. We'll continue to expand our footprint. Lessons learned. For me, the very first things that we have to look at this point, and most people, when they look at acquisitions, they start looking at the finances, right? They start looking at whether or not, the financial picture lines up. And that's, of course, absolutely important. You got to make sure finance and legal and governance.
It's like a starting point.
All that kind of stuff, right? Compliance, you got to figure all that out. The very first things I look at right now are cultural fit and leadership philosophy fit, right?
Especially if you're collaborating, you're getting in bed with them, right?
Yeah. Well, and our intent is, we've acquired a number of books of business in the past. Our intent at this point is to acquire teams, right?
You want the resources that already work well together. And,
There's a shortage of 550,000 cyber professionals in the U.S. right now. I can't hire talent fast enough. So this is partially an acqui-hire strategy. And so I need to make sure that we fit well together. And, cultural integration is challenging. I won't sugarcoat it. You learn lessons every time.
I'm kind of having to do it, but thankfully they're already in the same building. But when, since the manufacturing business is now part of the rest of my businesses, it's like getting the overlap to be more collaborative and stuff. It's even that is different. So taking a whole other group, whole different city, whatever.
Yeah.
And I could see it being challenging.
Yeah.
Because Nexus IT is a great brand in general. It's recognizable. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And it's, we've worked hard again, a decade or so ago is I have this epiphany of, we have to become a marketing and sales organization, a strong marketing and sales organization. Today, we are one of the strongest nationwide.
Oh, yeah.
We're not the largest by any stretch of the imagination.
Not yet.
But we are one of the most visible. And people know who we are, right? And so that's part of what we're, leveraging too, is saying, hey, look, we realize you hit ceilings. We hit them too, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. We know how to get beyond those. We know how to help you, right? We know how to help you dial in your business, stop having so many headaches, take good care of your clients, take good care of your people. We know how to market and sell your business, right? So let's join forces and let's build together. But you have to make sure you're very aligned in vision and mission and purpose and the culture for that to work. Otherwise, again, my brother and I were always pulling against each other. Yeah. And that stunted the capabilities of the business to grow. So those are, that's where I really focus my initial, even 3, 5, 6 conversations with a potential, a potential founder or team that might be joining us is, are we the right fit for each other? Can we get married? Right. Or are we going to get divorced in 6 months or a year? So, let's make sure that that's all going to work out. And then let's, dig deeper into financial due diligence and legal and compliance and governance and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you're working through all of this stuff, how long does a deal like that take?
Easily 4 to 6 months.
Okay. That's pretty quick if you think about it, right? Yeah. Like that's not too bad.
We did one deal in 30 days,
wow.
Which a book of business that a business wanted to offboard it, as quickly as possible.
Okay. And then, so I guess whoever's being acquired, they could be in a scenario where it's like, I'm ready to pass this on. Yeah. I want my clients to be taken care of. Yep. That would obviously make more sense and be quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But on average, and it's typical for some of these to take 6 to 9 months sometimes, right? You got to go through the right process. You need to date adequately and figure out if you're the right fit for each other. Due diligence alone, is easily 45 to 60 days.
Yeah.
Once you go under LOI, and you're going to dig deep, and do a QV, and really understand, is this a good, portfolio that we want to acquire? That's easily a 45 to 60 day process. And it involves, attorneys, it involves advisors, financial advisors and all that kind of stuff.
We've got a lot of good takeaways from this. I feel like we'll be able to sum up into some field notes. What are the main, top 3 you would want to leave behind?
Yeah, good question. You are the bottleneck to the growth of your organization, right? If whether you have a founding team or you're a solo founder, you are the bottleneck. And it is on you to close your gaps, right?
Yep.
Or to find the right resources or access to knowledge and and information to close those gaps, right? Yep. That I think is one of my biggest epiphanies. 2 is that any thriving business must realize and know that you are a marketing and sales organization, and almost first and foremost, right?
Yeah, you
got to nail your client experience, your people experience, but you also got to be one of your top priorities has to be marketing and sales. And you as a founder or a leader, a senior leader, particularly in that organization, whether you're a hired gun or a founder, right? You got to get over it and realize I'm in sales, right? And that's been, because I'm introverted and I'm an ambivert. I have the capability of stepping out and being adequately extroverted. But that's been a journey and a bit of a struggle for me to step out of my comfort zone and say, okay, I'm not going to be introverted and I'm going to go build network and I'm going to create opportunity. I become really good at it.
Plenty of trial and error to get you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And awkward conversations, I'm sure.
Conversations, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's been people that, over the years have said, the first time I met you, 12 years ago, you were a little awkward.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't
doubt it.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, people think I'm weird all the time, it is what it is.
Yeah. I'm a geek. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. I can't hide that nerdiness ever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that I think is, one of those kind of big epiphanies and lessons. And maybe the other is just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you are a founder or a leader, your journey to level up never ends. It's constant. And most days you're going to be out of your comfort zone. Many days you're going to get blindsided by things that you never saw coming. And you just got to get comfortable with, I'm consistently going to be under fire, and this is going to be a lot to deal with. But I have the capabilities, and if I'm willing to open my mind, to be growth-minded, to have adequate emotional intelligence, I can consistently confront those challenges that are presented before me, and I can overcome those, right?
Yeah. You kind of get a little almost numb to it in a way where it's like, and you realize it because you solve one big problem and then there's another one, no matter what. And I mean, it is what it is, but you get numb to it where it's like, you have to be able to, I think it's valuable to be able to take a vacation and check out completely. 100%. And there's a big fire going on, but your team's working on it, and you have to be able to leave that back at home and check out and give yourself a mental break. And then you come back and then, you're ready to go, and I think that's that's a hard skill set that some entrepreneurs I know can't do.
Yeah.
And they never take some of that weight off their shoulders because of it. And it makes it difficult.
I've struggled with that too, man.
It's hard. It's a hard skill to learn and figure out. I'm still figuring it out at times, but
yeah, I mean, it's easy to run yourself absolutely ragged, especially in the midst of crisis, in the midst of dealing with significant challenges. The best thing you can do is, even if it's just a couple of days, over a long weekend or something, take off a Friday and Monday.
Yeah.
Get away, preferably get somewhere where you can turn technology off, right?
Yeah.
Refocus, because you come back refreshed. You come back with better ideas to be able to solve the challenges. When you're in the midst of crisis, you got these damn blinders on, and you're running so ragged that it just becomes really difficult to put on a different lens and to begin to solve those problems in a more constructive way. And so, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And, you need to give your team that luxury as well. Right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Especially in crisis, they have times where they're running ragged too, and you need, for them to be able to, continue to help you solve and produce and create the right outcomes. You need them to be able to step away and decompress as well. Yeah. And respect that time also.
Oh yeah.
Say, hey, I want you to turn off all your notifications, turn off your email. We'll call you if there's an emergency that involves you. But the reality is, in 5 years, we maybe had to call 3 people with an emergency that, where we had to get some information from them, you can usually go without, individuals. Even I've had my own personal bouts as well, that I've had to deal with. It's been, let's see now, just over 5 years ago, I spent 4 months in and out of the hospital.
Yeah, you're talking to me about that.
Got really sick. I couldn't work for 4 months. My team had to run the business, and and I went through, not long before my brother and I split the business, I went through a marital divorce, right? And that was a hard time for me to engage, adequately with the business. I was dealing with a lot of, family pressures and a lot of difficulties there, and trying to take, really good care of my boys, being a partial single dad, right? At that time, and them needing a lot of my attention and focus, and obviously going through a pretty intense grieving cycle of of a failed marriage, right? So you go through those phases where you have challenges, and having a good a good business, a good team who can step up,
and also letting them step up.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like just, you kind of have to, jump, or take the time and, like you come back, there might be some fires that are left over, but it's like, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I also feel like when you take those breaks, it almost, because you check out, you come back and it gives you the ability to like get home at night and check out quicker because your brain is able to check out and you remind yourself, this is how I check out.
Yep.
So like you get home at 5 and you can check out quicker versus I've noticed like when I go long periods of time where I don't do those checkouts, I get home and I ruminate. It's like, and so it helps. I feel like with just that aspect as well.
The later in the day you work, it seems like the more the gears just keep churning, right? And then you're 2:00 in the morning, wide awake in bed, and you just can't stop thinking about it.
I try to prevent that as much as I can, but sometimes it's just difficult. It doesn't happen all the time. But I think this has been a great chat.
This has been awesome.
Those are good takeaways.
I really appreciate the invitation again. I'm
Absolutely.
honored by it.
Yeah, dude.
I appreciate your friendship.
Absolutely. We guys still got to try all these fancy bourbons you got and scotches and whiskeys.
We need to have you up at the house soon. Yeah.
So to wrap it up, what we do is we have you sign a book, your field notes, and thanks for having us, dude. Find us on LinkedIn, all the YouTube and stuff. We'll post it everywhere. And this is some good stuff here.
Congrats on the podcast and all the success, my friend.
Thank you. Great chat with Earl Foote. A lot of amazing takeaways with many years of experience with his 23 years of being an entrepreneur. The first note, which is obviously important, is all about consistently leveling up as an owner and a founder. I'm a big believer in that myself, and I can see it whenever I'm not focusing on leveling up. I see sales in the reports flatline, so it's pretty valid. You always have to focus on yourself and look inward. A very important one, which applies all across being an entrepreneur, is the aversion to risk. Because obviously starting a new business is extremely risky, and starting anything is extremely risky. You have to be of the mindset that the risk is going to be worth it. And without the risk, you'll just never know if the success is there or not. So you have to push that aside and plow through and really just not let the risk get to you. Another important one that I've also seen myself is you have to, you as the founder and the CEO do determine the success of the company. So when you're limiting yourself or you're not pushing hard, you will flatline, you won't see that growth. You become the bottleneck if you're not constantly getting after it. And I've seen this myself from previous years and years that I look back and remember either something's going on in my personal life, like having a new kid, or the process of buying out a business partner, which, can be a 6-month ordeal. You can see on reporting the flatline from that. And it's very clear that during that flatline is when I was focused on other things, whether that was outside of work or stressful things in work that prevent you from, pushing things forward. So you have to constantly be pushing to grow and carry that momentum and push that momentum forward. And if you don't, then you will flatline. You can't be lazy as a founder. You have to make things happen to make things grow. Another great point, which I have learned to be important myself, is obviously taking care of the clients is important in a B2B business. It's a top priority, but at the end of the day, if you're not focusing on sales and marketing and growth, you'll flatline, you'll start shrinking, and you can only do so much with, a certain number or limited number of clients. But it's always going to be more and more important for growth to add more and more of those clients, and figuring out the best rate of growth while still keeping quality control on the service you're providing is a perfect place to be in. And finding that is crucial for a B2B service business that has some hands-on services or white glove services where you're going to just have to figure out what that slot is and stay in it. And then one of my favorite, because I literally go to Maui in a couple days, is to take breaks. Very important to take breaks and give yourself a mental break. And honestly, you see a lot of value when you step aside and let things go without you. And at the end of the day, when you're sitting there thinking by the pool or whatever on vacation or at the beach, you're probably coming up with ideas that you wouldn't have when you're in the middle of the day by day at your office. So taking breaks is crucial. It prevents burnout and makes it all enjoyable because, at the end of the day, what are we all working for here? It's not to keep working. It's to enjoy life at a different level. So definitely take some breaks. So that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening or watching. We hope that these field notes can be of value to you. And don't forget to check us out to help you build your next product and get through all the minefields that you have to go through to bring your product to market. Check us out on all the social media platforms and stay in touch to find out what we're currently working on and what we're working on next.